June 2025 arrived with a sense of dread across the Middle East. The air was thick with uncertainty, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same question: what would happen next? From the shores of the Mediterranean to the deserts of Iran, people felt the weight of history pressing down on them. In Tel Aviv's bustling markets, vendors exchanged worried glances as they sold their goods, while in Tehran's tea houses, hushed voices debated the latest rumors. There was a shared sense, even among strangers, that something was about to break, a tension that crossed borders and politics. The world watched with bated breath as US-Iran nuclear talks, once a fragile hope for peace, collapsed in dramatic fashion. The headlines flashed across every screen, and a dangerous silence settled in their wake, as if the region itself was holding its breath. Israel's government, facing the cameras, warned of an existential threat that could not be ignored. Across the border, Iranian leaders addressed their nation, speaking of national pride, resilience, and the right to self-defense. The rhetoric grew sharper, echoing through homes and city squares. News of Iran's nuclear progress spread quickly, each new report feeling like the tick of a clock counting down. Scientists worked behind guarded doors, and the world wondered how close the region was to a point of no return. The US government responded with urgency, ordering embassy evacuations and giving military families the option to leave. These were not just precautionary measures, they were unmistakable signs that the threat of conflict was real and growing. Yet daily life continued. Shoppers still filled the streets, and commuters hurried to work, but anxiety simmered beneath the surface. Every siren, every breaking news alert, sent a ripple of fear through the crowds. On social media, rumors and speculations spread like wildfire. Was this just another round of threats and bluster, or was war truly inevitable this time? People scrolled endlessly, searching for answers, hoping for reassurance that never came. The collapse of the talks had removed the last safety net. Diplomatic channels fell silent, and border checkpoints grew tense. The region now teetered on the edge, with no clear path back to stability. Around the world, leaders and citizens alike braced for a conflict that no one wanted, but no one seemed able to stop. The sense of foreboding was unmistakable. A storm was gathering, and the world could only watch and wait. For Israel, the threat was clear and immediate. The IAEA reported Iran had amassed uranium dangerously close to weapons grade. Diplomacy had failed. Tehran rejected the last US offer, and the IAEA declared Iran non-compliant.
Israel's military window was closing. Iran's air defenses, damaged last year, were being rebuilt fast. If Israel waited, future strikes would be far riskier.
Israeli leaders saw a rapidly advancing nuclear program, failed diplomacy, and a shrinking chance to act. Tehran's threats were taken seriously. This was no longer just rhetoric. The choice: strike now or risk a nuclear-armed Iran.
By mid-June, Israel decided inaction was the greater danger. In Tehran, the world looked very different. Years of sanctions and foreign pressure made Iran's nuclear program a symbol of sovereignty.
Memories of past Western interference fueled a narrative of victimhood and defiance. US bases in the region felt like a tightening noose.
Iran's leaders, especially the Revolutionary Guard, insisted only strength could guarantee survival. Defense Minister Nasserzadeh warned, if attacked, Iran would strike US bases across the region.
Ordinary Iranians struggled under sanctions, feeling unjustly targeted. Many saw the world's focus on their nuclear program as hypocritical, given Israel's own arsenal.
This sense of double standards fueled defiant nationalism. Iran was determined not to be brought to its knees. On June 12th, under the cover of darkness, Israeli fighter jets roared to life, launching a daring nighttime assault that would reverberate across the region. The operation had been meticulously planned for months, with every detail scrutinized to maximize the element of surprise and minimize risk to the pilots. Pilots navigated intricate, carefully charted routes, weaving through hostile airspace and avoiding detection by Iranian radar. Their mission: to strike deep inside Iran, targeting some of the most heavily fortified nuclear sites in the world.
The focus was on facilities like Fordow and Natanz, centers of uranium enrichment buried deep underground, protected by layers of concrete and steel. These sites represented the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions, and neutralizing them was seen as critical to Israel's security. As the first bomb struck, news broke through flashes and thunderous explosions lighting up Iran's night sky. The world watched in real time as social media filled with videos of distant booms and panicked voices.
The operation was a high-stakes gamble. Precision, surprise, and survival all at play. In command centers, Israeli officers monitored every second, knowing that a single mistake could mean disaster for their pilots and for the mission. Pilots braved a gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire, evading missile trails and navigating through bursts of flak. Iran's air defenses, though damaged by the initial strikes, remained a deadly threat.
The goal was clear: cripple Iran's nuclear program and send an unmistakable message to the world. Israel would not allow a nuclear Iran, no matter the cost or risk. As dawn broke over the Middle East, the full impact of the strikes remained uncertain. Smoke rose over Iranian cities, and the world braced for what might come next. The shadow war had erupted into open conflict, changing the region overnight. Across the Middle East, civilians awoke to a new reality. Streets emptied as fear and uncertainty spread, and news headlines declared a crisis that threatened to spiral out of control. The world watched, stunned by the audacity and scale of the attack. Governments scrambled to respond, and global markets trembled as the possibility of a wider war loomed. The fate of the region now hung in the balance, as leaders and citizens alike waited anxiously for the next move in this dangerous new chapter of Middle Eastern history. Iran's response was swift and furious. The world watched in shock as the first reports came in. Tehran was not hesitating. Within minutes, Iranian forces were mobilizing, their intentions clear: to send a message that would echo far beyond the region.
There was no time for debate. We had to show strength immediately. Every second counted. The chain of command was activated, and our forces scrambled to respond to the threat. The tension in the war rooms was palpable as we braced for what was coming. Within hours, the Revolutionary Guard unleashed a massive swarm of explosive drones. The scale was unprecedented. Hundreds of unmanned aircraft, each loaded with explosives, took to the skies from hidden launch sites across Iran. It was a display of both technological adaptation and sheer determination. These weren't advanced jets, but their sheer numbers overwhelmed Israel's defenses. The Iron Dome, designed for missile threats, struggled to keep up with the relentless wave. Anti-aircraft guns lit up the night, but the sky was thick with targets.
Hundreds of drones targeted military bases, infrastructure, and cities, aiming to sow chaos. The attacks were coordinated, striking at power plants, communication hubs, and even civilian neighborhoods. The sound of explosions echoed through the night, leaving entire communities in fear and confusion.
In Israel, air raid sirens blared as civilians rushed to shelters. Families grabbed what they could and hurried underground, the uncertainty and terror written on every face. For many, it was the first time they truly felt the war at their doorstep. The Iron Dome intercepted many drones, but some broke through, causing destruction and fear. Fires broke out in city streets, and emergency services raced to respond. The sense of vulnerability was overwhelming, as people realized that not every threat could be stopped.
The attack was a message. Iran could strike back, even if its nuclear sites were hit. Their leaders made it clear: retaliation would be swift, and it would reach deep into enemy territory. The world was now on notice.
It was asymmetric warfare, less advanced, but highly effective. Iran's use of simple, cost-effective drones showed that even nations with fewer resources could challenge high-tech militaries. The battlefield had changed, and so had the rules.
The retaliation was psychological as much as physical, bringing the war to Israeli doorsteps. The fear and anxiety spread quickly as families huddled together, unsure of what the next hour would bring. The impact was felt in every home, every shelter.
The reality of conflict was now impossible to ignore. Smoke rose over city skylines as dawn broke, and the world awoke to a new, more dangerous chapter in the region's history. Both nations had crossed a line. The old boundaries of deterrence and diplomacy had been shattered, replaced by open confrontation. The stakes had never been higher. The world held its breath, waiting to see what would come next. News of the strikes and counterstrikes sent shockwaves worldwide. The US reaffirmed support for Israel but urged de-escalation, working behind the scenes to contain the crisis. The UK warned ships in the Persian Gulf, fearing the conflict could disrupt global oil supplies. France and Germany condemned the violence and called for a ceasefire, offering to mediate.
Arab neighbors were anxious, publicly silent, privately fearing regional chaos. Qatar and Oman tried to mediate, seeking off-ramps to violence.
The UN Security Council met in emergency session, but divisions paralyzed action. US military leaders stayed on high alert, managing the crisis minute by minute. The world held its breath, hoping leaders would pull back from the brink. Beyond strategy and politics, war became a daily terror for ordinary people. In Israel, air raid sirens and bomb shelters became routine.
Families huddled underground, trying to comfort children as explosions echoed above.
Fear and anger mixed at Iran and at their own leaders for bringing war home.
In Iran, the airstrikes on nuclear sites sparked shock, anger, and a surge of national pride. Even critics of the government felt their nation had been violated.
Government media stoked defiance, but beneath it all was deep fear.
People worried. Would the strikes expand? Was a wider war coming?
In both countries, parents prayed for their children's safety, desperate for the madness to end. The human cost was incalculable. After days of violence, a fragile quiet settled over the region.
Israel's strikes had damaged Iran's nuclear facilities, setting back the program, but at a high cost. Iran's drone attacks caused disruption, damage, and civilian casualties in Israel.
For Iran, the blow to its nuclear program was severe. Rebuilding would take years. The drone retaliation showed Iran could hit back, but didn't change the military balance.
Both nations suffered, lives lost, infrastructure damaged, economies shaken. The cycle of attack and retaliation deepened mistrust and hatred. Hopes for a peaceful solution seemed more remote than ever. The fighting had stopped, but the wounds, physical and psychological, remained. The region was left more unstable and dangerous. The future was uncertain. In the aftermath, an uneasy silence settled over the Middle East. The airstrikes and drone attacks had ended, but fear and trauma lingered.
The central question remained: what next for Iran's nuclear program? Many feared the attack only hardened Iran's resolve.
Diplomacy seemed dead, and hopes for peace felt distant. Both sides claimed victory, but the cost was clear: new vulnerabilities, deeper divisions. The world called for calm, but trust was gone. The people of Israel and Iran were left to live with the consequences, hoping the memory of destruction might one day inspire a different path. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and share this video for more in-depth coverage of global events. Your support helps us bring you the stories that matter most.